Welcome to the Inside Circle podcast, where your host, Elder Jackson III, and his guests get personal about prison and transformation in all of its forms.
I keep reminding myself that I've got the key, and I'm the only one who can set me free.
This is Inside Circle, where your truth will set you free.
Hello, folks, and welcome again, and thank you for taking the time out to give the Inside Circle podcast a listen. And today we have with us Dr. Samuel Arroyo. Dr. Arroyo's professional portfolio includes consulting government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and private sector entities throughout the nation, working with credible messengers, criminal justice-involved youth and their families. Dr. Arroyo has trained individuals in the use of cognitive behavioral therapy, aggression replacement therapy, and psychoanalysis, both in carceral settings and urban communities. Dr. Arroyo is certified in multiple therapeutic modalities to include CBT, ART, breaking barriers, alternatives to violence, restorative justice practices, and others. He is also taught for John Jay College of Criminal Justice's Sociology Department, Mercy College, and New York Theological. Dr. Arroyo is an expert in the field. He is a leader and change agent. He is an effective leader implementing high-risk interventions to help mitigate violence and gang activities throughout the nation, including cities like New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Washington, D.C. Moreover, he is a role model, a credible messenger, and a passionate advocate for the rights of youth and all formerly incarcerated people. Hello, Dr. Arroyo. How in the hell are you doing today?
Hello, I'm doing great.
Well, that is quite an impressive biography. And, here we like to acknowledge that an individual is where they're at, and you have a tremendous resume. And I would like to get off into those things. And we all come from somewhere. You didn't start off as Dr. Arroyo. So can you give us a little background, a little bit more flesh on the bone about who you are and where you come from?
Well, I'm the youngest out of the family of 7. I come from descendants of Puerto Rico. My both parents are Puerto Rican. Born and raised in the island. I was born in the States. And I lived in my childhood, throughout my childhood and teenage years, I lived in Spanish Harlem, which is an area located in Manhattan's, east side. And I wasn't a doctor then, but just a young man struggling like all the others my age. Most of my role models were not my dad. My dad, of course, was a factory worker for most of his life. My mother was a at-home, live mom, taking care of the kids while dad was away at work. And I kind of, always thought about myself as a black sheep because my brothers, they're all professional. I had a couple of sisters, nurses, one in the in law enforcement, and my brother was a businessman all his life. On the other hand, for me, I was looking at the glamour of the streets and those around me, and I was kind of driven to that since an early age. And yeah, that's why I grew up at Spanish Harlem. That's why I got involved in the street life, and where I basically live a lifestyle that really led to my incarceration later on. And during my incarceration, that's why I was introduced to education, basically higher education, and where I started really investing in myself and getting more involved in higher education.
Yeah. So, and thank you for sharing that. And when you speak about higher education and getting engaged in higher education. You gave, some more meat on the bone, as it were, about your background and where you come from. And when we kind of like skim the surface, it's almost like skipping a rock across the water. I heard in there you said, okay, I became incarcerated, and well, wait a minute, hold on, man. How do we wind up in the pen?
Oh man, I would say and I also have to mention I'm a father of three. Two of my children were prior to my incarceration. Um, I became involved with an organized drug gang out of Spanish Harlem, running the heroin in the five boroughs. Um, and the more I got involved in the life, the more extracurricular activities I took on. Um, I was doing a lot of strong arm work for the organization, and little did I know there was a big investigation on my organization, and little by little they started picking us off. It took a couple of batches, a few here and there, and then eventually I ended up getting wrapped up in that as well, and ended up getting a sentence of 14 and a third to 40 years out of New York State, and serving 15 years out of that, nearly 15 years.
Yeah.
Out of that bit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, that's quite a ride. And, I read your bio, and I'm a bit more familiar with you personally than just what's on the bio, for transparency sake, folks. I get the opportunity, I'm blessed and graced to be able to engage and work with Sammy around the country. And you heard in there when he was introduced, Sam, when I introduced you, you talked about being a credible messenger, and you talked about, forms of therapy. And so you are very much aware and very well educated, not just as far as books are concerned, but on a personal level through your own transformation and healing process, that I don't just wind up engaged in criminal activity. There are forces, there are things that, are toiling and swimming around inside of me that contribute to my decision making, that contribute to how I end up where I end up. I don't just wind up there. So can you speak a bit about your internal landscape?
Okay. Well, I do speak about violence in my family. It's intergenerational cycle of violence. It went on for my uncles. Their activities in violence and murders and stuff of that nature, and ended up in prison for 20, 30 years, and then followed up with my cousins, same way, 17 years, 15 years. And then unfortunately, I ended up getting involved as well and ended up incarcerated, and so did my son. So it was, when I talk about the cycle of violence and incarceration in my family, that was, that was evident. It was, but I did mention that I consider myself the black sheep of the family because I could have done other things. But I do feel that because of my dad's involvement in work, I didn't have a pretty good relationship with my dad. And I think that I, somehow was driven to the streets, and individuals that were from the community, and not doing things like my dad was doing. On the other hand, they were living glamorous lives, and I was driven to that at an early age.
And so, and I'm hearing, you speaking there about being driven to that at an early age, and seeing the things that you saw, when you speak about those generational cycles. And so it's obvious, in hearing you speak about it, how that impacted you. What was the impetus, if you can identify it, for your change or your transformation? Because if it's inherent, coming from, multiple generations, and then you got it. And then I hear you speak about, your son was incarcerated. What prompted you to change? What was the inspiration for you to change and begin to break those cycles?
Well, change for me didn't happen in a vacuum. I ended up incarcerated with a lengthy prison sentence. Um, and during my time incarcerated, like I mentioned earlier, I was involved with various therapeutical models. Um, and being incarcerated, meant that I was required to complete, and various programs like everybody else. And I did get involved in alternatives to violence. I also got involved in breaking barriers, which is a model that came out of California.
Mhm.
Um, and I was also involved in school. I started going to school in prison while I was incarcerated in Sing Sing Correctional Facility. And the curriculum was, behavioral sciences. So the curriculum that I had access to basically allowed me to start engaging in conducting self-analysis and looking to see what were those things that kind of drove me away from what my parents and my brothers and sisters had basically modeled for me. I always tell people I didn't check in at the door. I did a lot of the stuff that I had already been doing in the house side. It continued on during my incarceration, um, especially when having to deal, without being able to see my children raise,
Mhm.
grow up, and that was a difficult piece for me. So when you talk about the impetus, I think, for one, I knew I had to change if I didn't want to make this,
Mhm.
my life causing my life. So, and then the other piece too is that I started noticing a lot of my friends that I seen 2 or 3 times when I was still incarcerated go home and come back. Um, those guys were just like me, just engaged in that lifestyle.
Yeah.
So there was no doubt that I was, and I could tell you that when asked the question, what are you going to do when you go home? I was like, I'm going home to rob drug dealers and get money. That was my thing until I started going to school, and exposed to this curriculum, which led to, like, my introspection and self-analysis, and trying to figure out, like, what did I have to do to change,
Yeah.
and whether or not it was possible, right? So yeah.
And so in that looking at yourself, in that introspection, what was, if you can identify, what was the largest factor that you said, okay, I got to change this. If I don't change this, I'm fucked.
Mhm. Well, one of the biggest pieces that I knew that I had was a violence problem. I knew it wasn't normal to just look at somebody and then just go on and set it off on the person. I knew that wasn't normal. I knew there was a lot of stuff that I was doing that I definitely had to correct. Um, and some of the introspection, what led to the conclusion that it led me to, was that I had learned behavior from my mother as a kid,
Mhm.
and realizing that my mother, she was her parents died when she was 9 years old, both parents. So she was, left to be raised by her brothers and sisters, and she didn't have the best upbringing. And so my mother was, she ruled by the hand. She was heavy on the hand. Um, and I think that for me, when there was some form of correction, there was never a conversation as to why I was getting beaten, or, you know what I mean? I knew I may have done something wrong, just didn't know what. So I
Yeah.
think I learned to communicate through violence. That was
Yeah.
one of the biggest pieces for me, that I realized, like, that my mother had taught me, when something wasn't right, I had to respond violently. And
Yeah.
and and that was a big reality for me, you know?
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I can see that that's a big one. And I wonder, for somebody like yourself, what the journey was like making that transformation in prison. Because, and I'm,
Mhm.
I'm asking, for folks who may be listening to this and wondering themselves, because there's a lot of would you, oh, I'm going to this, a conference, I'm going, do some yoga over here. I'm gonna go to the beach and sit in the lotus position and chant. And that's simple. That's pretty easy. How does somebody, what is the transformation like, or what is the process like for somebody in a potentially ultra violent environment like prison to get to a place where I'm saying to myself, okay, what I've been doing up to this point ain't been working, and I'm gonna do something different. What is that like?
Well, because of the indeterminate sentence, right? I never knew when I was coming home or if I was coming home. Had quite a few issues in the inside. Ended up in the box for 18 months when I first started. So like I said earlier, a lot of the things that I had been doing in the outside, I was doing in the inside. So there was an internal struggle. I knew I had to change, but at some instances, I really didn't want to change, especially because I was in an environment where, to be normal, you have to be abnormal to be successful in that abnormal environment. So, I think that as it didn't happen in a vacuum, but as time went on, and I continued to develop in my relationships with my mom, which I was also able to speak to about some of the things that I had picked up from her that she had taught me through her actions with me, and then also with my dad, confronting my dad, like, why did you allow my mother to like beat on me like that and not step in? And the other piece was like, why did you stick to her? Right, that was the other piece. But I guess that my relationship development with family members that I didn't have a relationship with on our side. And also the fact that I didn't want my kids to follow in my, in my pattern. I didn't want that to happen. And I had, at an early age, seen signs, develop prior to me being incarcerated and my son. When I went away, my daughter was 3 years old. 3.5, and then my son was 8 months old. And, I used to put cartoons for him and all that he wouldn't watch cartoons, but I used to box at the time. I used to take him to the boxing with me, and I used to put on boxing at home, and he would just watch boxing. He can watch boxing all day and be mellowed out. So I started seeing that there were things that were in me, also that I was passing on to my children. And I think that between the development of relationships, and going to school and learning a lot about myself and what was leading to my, my violent behavior, I think that I started getting some hope and seeing that, maybe there is an opportunity for me to, change.
Yeah.
And, and little by little, like I said, it didn't happen in a vacuum. And it took some years, even after getting out of prison, to really get a handle of that, being able to manage that. So
yeah. I would imagine, because I only know my personal experience, and so I'm always, trying to learn, from other folks' experience, and I can only imagine, that struggle for you. And so as you begin to make this transformation, as you begin to get steeped in education and learning these different practices, was there a point where you can identify where the switch was flipped? Because you spoke to earlier, okay, when I get out, I'm robbing drug dealer. Was there a point where that changed for you?
Yeah, but it didn't happen right away. It wasn't like a light switch. It was a long process, but it really was. And I mentioned that I was I think you mentioned from meeting the bio. I did teach various models. I was an alternatives to violence program facilitator, master facilitator, but I was pro-violence. And so a lot of the programming that I did while incarcerated was mainly to get myself out, to get out.
Yeah.
Kind of find out, fast forward, 2004, July 2004, I was released from prison. And yeah, I kind of assumed I had this reality while incarcerated, that I would do the right thing. I'll get myself together, become, become, employable, and got out, kind of find out that I couldn't find a job. I couldn't find a job no matter what I was doing. I did go back to school, ended up getting my first degree in. I committed my first, stick up. I went back into sticking up. Um, I had been applying for jobs on a regular basis. Getting a job in our day and time is a job. And I made multiple attempts. I would get up every morning. I scheduled 3 to 5 application. And I did that, and then I would have 2 or 3 interviews a week, and I always kept getting the same response. Like, listen, because I never hid my incarceration. I felt like I was open about it. And one of the responses to me being incarcerated, and my son, when I went away, my daughter was 3 years old, 3.5, and then my son was 8 months old. And, I used to put cartoons for him and all that. He wouldn't watch cartoons, but I used to box at the time. I used to take him to the boxing ring with me, and I used to put on boxing at home, and he would just watch boxing. He can watch boxing all day and be mellowed out. So I started seeing that there were things that were in me, also that I was passing on to my children. And I think that between the development of relationships, and going to school and learning a lot about myself and what was leading to my violent behavior, I think that I started getting some hope, and seeing that maybe there is an opportunity for me to change. And and little by little, like I said, it didn't happen in a vacuum. And it took some years, even after getting out of prison, to really get a handle of that, being able to manage that. So
Yeah. I would imagine, because I only know my personal experience, and so I'm always, trying to learn, from other folks' experience, and I can only imagine, that struggle for you. And so as you begin to make this transformation, as you begin to get steeped in education and learning these different practices, was there a point where you can identify where the switch was flipped? Because you spoke to earlier, okay, when I get out, I'm robbing drug dealer. Was there a point where that changed for you?
the response I used to get was like, you did too much time. You guys, the data, right? The data speaks that you guys go back within the first, 1 to 3 years, or and so that was tough, hearing that. The other piece too is the pressures and the the unrealistic expectations of the people, of the person that I came to live with, that I would be out in 3 months and then have a job, already have a career, opportunity, because it's what I thought while I was in the inside. It never turned out. And so that pressure was what really led to me going back and throwing the brick and getting into sticking up again. And I always say that I'm an extremist. I either do or don't. And then I was getting so much involved in the life again, and I knew I said, this is gonna go ugly. And so I reached out, let him know where I was at. I was at the fork roads, and that I was ready to go in, full throttle.
Yeah.
And he just asked me, yo, Sammy, just give me a couple of days, man. Give me 3 days. He asked me for 3 days. And I said, oh, I'll give you 3 days. And the second day he called me back and he said, man, I got you an interview with somebody. And, went on the interview. I kept to my word. I stood out the street. I was hired. to be called back like hours later, and then by the president of the organization, who was like, "Man, I'm having trouble, like, bringing you on board, and then you go back." And I was like, "Listen, man, I work for free for 2 weeks. If you like the way I work, you keep me. If you don't like it, I'll keep it moving. No hard feelings. I'll keep it moving." Um, and then he rehired me again. He said, "Okay, we'll bring you on board." They made me an offer. And then I was in that organization, entry level position. By the time I left there, I was already a supervisor and had already established, a bunch of networks.
And so where'd you go from there? Because again, there's a laundry list
Mhm.
of items in your bio. How did we get where we're at today, where we're sitting having this conversation on this podcast?
Mm. So I say that in during my time out, I had 3 times where I went back, right? I realized I was sticking up, and every time that I had or I threw a brick was at times of unemployment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward, I ended up in a time where there was a lot of programs losing funding. I ended up losing a job again. And every time I came back to that same thing that I was comfortable in doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to say that I applied some harm reduction technique because I realized that sticking up, I know what was going to happen. I was either going to kill somebody going to kill me. So I decided to do something else. I went back into, hustling. Um, and fast forward again, I realized, like, hold on, the money's not coming in correctly. And I was getting those bad thoughts of, you got to do something. And here I am working with friends, but yet realizing that now I feel like, like I felt before I went into prison, like something got to get done. This person doesn't look like they're being loyal, they're violating, and I got to do something. Finally realized, man, like, I have to do something different.
Yeah.
So while struggling with um, mending broken relationships, establishing, my home and employment, I realized like I have to really change. Um, so by 2015, I had already made a decision that I wasn't going to throw a brick anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I graduated for my doctorate, that I obtained my doctorate, 2 weeks later, I lose my job again, and then my mother dies. So those three, events happened like back to back, but yet I had made a decision that I wasn't going to do anything anymore. I had enough money saved up to like pay my rent and stuff like that and my bills for like 6, 7 months. I had already factored that in, and I went on full blast looking for like employment. Mind you that I had a doctorate now, so things got a little more difficult. Um, it the as months passed by, my money started getting lower and lower, and I'm glad to say that at that time I stuck to what I said I was gonna do. So since 2015, I think that's when my life changed. And then fast forward, I was able to obtain employment, doing great for myself. I had already started a business, and I was doing great for myself. In 2017, I had a daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that really changed my life. Being a dad again, because I wasn't able to mend the relationship with my children from a former relationship. But that kind of like really, really impacted me in a manner that I stuck to my guns. I said, that's it. Ain't no more throwing bricks. I gotta be a role model for my daughter. I gotta do the best I can, no matter what. I can't throw a brick.
Yeah.
And so I got, further and further involved in a field helping people. And I find that the more I help people, the more I help myself. Um, fast forward to 2020, I had just walked away from a job in government, if out of DC. Had met someone, a funder, through Keentone, and her name is Tanya Washington. I was able to meet her, have conversations with her, and she asked me would I be interested in joining her team. And I had nothing else but that, and I was like, yeah, why not? And I've been working with them ever since. I was able to. One of her things, right? Stipulation is you got to do your work. I'm like, I got to do my work. I've been doing my work for years.
Yeah.
I don't know how successful it looks, but I've been doing my work for a long time. But I was introduced to people on the team, and then people on your team from Inside Circle. So that's when my first encounter with Inside Circle when it happened.
Yeah.
And I think it was 2020.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so now, as a part of, the work that we get the opportunity to do together, and I know you're doing a lot more stuff. We've had the opportunity to work together in New Jersey, in New York, in DC, and we're looking at Baltimore now. And how is that for you? And when I say how is that for you, how does that, if it does, how does that feed you? How does that serve you? How does that show up in your life?
Well, I mentioned, you heard me mention earlier that I was a AVP facilitator, but I was pro-violence, right?
Yeah.
Which is crazy. It's crazy, right? Anything to get out of prison. But I like to say that at first, my first encounter with Inside Circle and the model you guys, have really implemented. I was so skeptic. I was a skeptic. I didn't believe in any model, because if I had been teaching a model I really didn't believe in, it can't work. These guys got to be faking. So I think that seeing the walk, seeing yourself, seeing Rick and Aaron, and later some of the other guys, but you guys were the first ones I met, you three. I start seeing that, hold on, these guys are not just doing what I used to do, right? Bullshitting. They're really living that life. They're really showing up in the way they should be showing up. I opened up to the model. And little did I know, it started, really impacting my life. The acronym PIES, when you talk about physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual, I feel that what me getting more involved in my healing, what it really did for me is really tied things up. So I was able to see how, my emotional life, which I didn't have much of a relationship with prior to meeting you guys, my emotional life was starting to change little by little. I became more aware of my emotions, and I was impacting, my physical being, and also, my intellectual, my spiritual life. And I think that over the years, is crazy now, right? Because I walk around, and I'm involved in at least 3 healing circles a week. And yeah, so when you ask how it impacted my life, in so many great ways it impacted my life. For one, I have a better relationship with the people around me, including my lady and my daughter, which she's challenging as it is, a young 8-year-old, but she, she's moved by that movie, Inside Out.
Yes.
And so we learn to have conversations about emotions and what how she feels. I've learned to respect her. When something happens between me and my partner, I don't look at her at fault. I start questioning myself, like, what is it? What's going on in me that I need to work on?
Yeah.
Because that's what it's really about for me.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest pieces that I've learned that if I have issues with somebody else, it's usually not about the other person. It's usually about myself.
Yeah.
So yeah. And here's the difference, right? All the modalities that I've been involved with in the past, they're basically set up as programs. So every program has a beginning and an end. I usually do good, right, throughout the whole program. But then when I don't have the program, it's gone. And I think what I've learned from you through your modality is it's a model. So it gave me something that I can use throughout my life to basically, check myself, see where I'm at, and I think that I've healed from so many traumas that I've had because of my previous lifestyle. I've been able to do a lot of work around friends that died in my lap, that I always carried the guilt and shame of maybe I was, the reason they got murdered. And so, I've been able to process all that. And I feel like I've been able to show up different in my own, my own spaces. So
yeah. What is something, and thank you for sharing that, because that's deeply personal. And I hope that this platform is one where people feel that they can come on here and open up in that way, and that people can listen and catch something for themselves, because everybody may not get the opportunity to sit in a circle, and circle may not be for everyone, but I hope that we are able to inspire folks to go and find what works for them so that they can get their healing. And so thank you for sharing that piece. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you'd like the people to know, learn, investigate, get into, any message, anything, any shout out, any projects that you're working on, anything you want to share?
I'm always working on something, but I think that if there's anything I like to offer, is the opportunity to learn about Inside Circle, learn about what you guys do, and get involved. I think one of the biggest things that I know being involved in the field for a long time is that we continue to invest monies in modalities, in programs, in organizations that really don't work. You feel me? And that's such a disservice to the people that we profess.
So thank you, Dr. Arroyo, for showing up and for coming in and sitting with us for a little while. And it's always an honor and a pleasure to get the opportunity to spend some time with you. And I'm going to drop a little nugget in here, and the person that hears it will know when they hear it. Felix, we're on to you, boy. We know what you're all about. And he knows what that means. And with that, we are out for the day. Thank you, folks, for listening to another episode of the Inside Circle podcast. And if you like what you've heard here, and if you believe in the work that it is that we're doing in this world, this podcast is just a small sample of some of the work that we're doing in the world, trying to get out and create spaces where folks can find their own personal freedom. And it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost spiritually, it comes at a cost mentally, it comes at a cost emotionally, and the easy cost is financially. So if you've listened to us, over the last couple of years, and you've heard some things that have touched your heart, become a member, support Inside Circle. And it's very easy to become a member and support by becoming a recurring donor. So come on, jump on, become a part of the Inside Circle family, and become a recurring donor. It doesn't take a whole lot, but every little bit counts. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us at the Inside Circle podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a comment on iTunes or wherever you listen. Follow us on Instagram at inside_circle and on Facebook at Inside Circle Org, all one word. Special thanks to the songwriter Rob Ricardo for his song, The Work. Join our mailing list and learn more about Inside Circle on our website at insidecircle.org. And remember, your truth will set you free.